They didn't know who they were messing with. What would you do if a group of HOA board members showed up at your front door with a legal 4-4? With a legal form saying they were seizing your property, your farmhouse, your land, the home your grandfather built with his bare hands? What if they handed you a certified letter telling you that you had 30 days to comply or they'd begin foreclosure proceedings? Most people would panic. Most people would call a lawyer, beg for mercy, and maybe even pack their bags. But I didn't, because what those HOA board members didn't know what they couldn't have known is that I hold the mortgage note on the very bank that finances every single home in their precious little neighborhood. Stay right there, because this story is about to get very satisfying. Smash that like button and subscribe to Ho Drama Neighbor. New revenge stories every week. It was a Wednesday morning in late autumn, the kind of quiet, golden morning where the roosters are just starting up and the dew is still sitting heavy on the fence posts when my phone buzzes with a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I live on a 14-acre farmstead that my family has owned for going on 3 generations. We're not HOA people. We never were HOA people. This land predates the entire subdivision that slowly crept up around us like kudzu over the last 15 years. But there he was, Richard Sterling, president of the Oakfield Crest Homeowners Association, standing at my gate in a pressed polo shirt, holding a manila envelope like he was personally delivering a subpoena from the hand of God himself. I walked down the gravel path, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said, "Morning, Richard. What brings you out here?" He didn't even blink. He just held out that envelope and said, "You've been in violation for 18 months. The board has voted. You need to read that." I took the envelope. I opened it slowly. And there it was, a 14-page notice of covenant violation and pending property action. They claimed my property had been absorbed into the Oakfield Crest HOA boundary during a 2019 rezoning adjustment. They said my barn was an unapproved structure. They said my fence line was non-compliant. They said my livestock and my chickens were a nuisance to community standards. And at the bottom of page 13, in bold legal font, it read, "Failure to comply may result in HOA-initiated lien and foreclosure proceedings under Section 12 of the Oakfield Crest Covenant Agreement." They were trying to take my farm. I stood there in my driveway reading that letter twice while Richard watched me with a smug little half-smile like he'd already won, like this was already over. I folded the letter back up, put it in my shirt pocket, looked Richard straight in the eyes, and said, "Thank you for this, Richard. You'll be hearing from me." He drove off in his spotless SUV, and I walked back to my porch, sat down in my grandfather's old rocking chair, and started making some phone calls. Here's what Richard and his board didn't bother to research. Here's the part of the story they skipped right over in their rush to flex their HOA muscles. My grandfather, Arthur Thomas Pendleton, didn't just build this farm. Back in 1987, he co-founded the Pioneer Heritage Financial Group, a small private mortgage bank that provided home loans to working families in our county when the big banks wouldn't touch them. It wasn't glamorous work. It was community work. It was real work. And when my grandfather passed in 2014, he left his controlling interest in that lending group to me. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When Oakfield Crest was developed in 2008 and 2009, the developer, struggling to get financing during the financial crisis, came to Pioneer Heritage Financial Group for the construction and mortgage loans. Grandfather Arthur, being the generous man he was, agreed. He structured a deal. Pioneer funded the initial build-out and held the master mortgage note on the development infrastructure and offered preferred lending to the first wave of homebuyers, which means, and follow me here carefully, that as the majority shareholder of Pioneer Heritage Financial Group, I am the primary note holder on the financial instrument that underlies the entire Oakfield Crest development. Not every individual home, no, but the community infrastructure loan. The road, the clubhouse, the drainage system, the landscaping, Front entrance with the fancy brick sign that Richard loved so much, all of it, financed by Pioneer. And Pioneer answers to me. They tried to foreclose on my farm, but I hold the note on their neighborhood. I gave it 2 weeks. I let Richard and his board feel confident. I let them send a follow-up letter, which they did, 7 days later, this time with a $5,500 cumulative fine attached. I let them feel like they were winning. Then I called my attorney, Elias Thorne, 22 years of property and community law, and I said, Elias, I need you to pull everything on the Oakfield Crest HOA's financial history, their charter documents, their covenant agreement, and their relationship with Pioneer Heritage. Elias called me back in 48 hours. And when he did, there was a long pause before he spoke. Then he said, they have no idea what they've done. We requested a formal HOA board hearing, which they were legally required to grant under their own covenant. We showed up on a Thursday evening, though. Board was there. Richard, his vice president, Susan Abernathy, the treasurer, Kevin Vance, and 3 other board members I'd never met. They had their HOA attorney present. They looked prepared. They looked smug. Richard opened the meeting by restating the violations and the fines. He laid out their case cleanly. He clearly expected me to either beg or argue about fence heights. Instead, Elias stood up and placed a single document on the table. It was a summary of 1 page of Pioneer Heritage Financial Group's position as note holder on the Oakfield Crest development infrastructure. Then Elias said, very calmly, my client has reviewed the HOA's actions with great interest. He'd like to draw the board's attention to Section 7, Clause 4 of the original Pioneer Development Agreement, which grants the note holder the right to review and contest any HOA action that materially affects the property values or financial standing of assets tied to the underlying note. The room went very quiet. Richard looked at the document. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at his attorney, whose face had gone pale in a way that told me everything I needed to know. Richard's attorney leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Richard's confident expression began slowly, beautifully to dissolve. Furthermore, Elias continued, my client wishes to note that the HOA's aggressive lien and foreclosure posturing against an adjacent legacy property that predates this development may constitute tortious interference with established property rights and could trigger a review of the HOA's own compliance with the terms of the Pioneer Development Note, a note. He paused for effect, which comes up for renewal in 4 months. I watched Kevin Vance, the treasurer, do the math in real time. His eyes went wide, because he knew they all knew that if that infrastructure note wasn't renewed on favorable terms, Oakfield Crest would be facing a financial crisis that would make my chicken coop look like absolutely nothing. Richard tried to hold it together. He called a 10-minute recess. When they came back, the smug was completely gone. His attorney spoke first quietly, carefully, and said that the board would like to explore a cooperative resolution. I let Elias do the talking. The result? Every single violation notice was withdrawn. The $5,500 in fines voided. The HOA formally acknowledged in writing that my farmstead, as a pre-existing property with grandfathered rights, was exempt from the Oakfield Crest covenant enforcement. They also agreed to install noise reduction landscaping along our shared border at their expense to resolve any future nuisance complaints before they ever reached me. And Richard Sterling. He resigned as HOA president 3 weeks later. Susan Abernathy is the president now. She brought me a pie. A real one. Cherry. From scratch. I appreciated that. My chickens are still here. My barn is still standing. My grandfather's fence line hasn't moved an inch. This story isn't really about revenge. It's about knowing your worth. It's about doing your homework before you pick a fight. It's about understanding that the person you're trying to bully might just be holding the keys to your entire kingdom. My grandfather used to say, never mistake quiet for weakness. Richard Sterling learned that lesson the hard way. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, a bad neighbor, or a bully in a polo shirt who underestimated you, drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome to HOA Drama Neighbor. We tell the stories nobody else is brave enough to tell. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell and never miss a moment. Because around here, the receipts always come out eventually.